Hi everyone, this is For the Love of Comics, and in this episode we're continuing our celebration of Will Eisner and A Contract with God by taking a look at 4 different editions of A Contract with God. If you're interested in an introduction to this groundbreaking book, check out our What is A Contract with God video linked above. And if you want to know a little bit more about Will Eisner and his greatest hits, check out our How to Get Started Reading the Comics of Will Eisner video, also linked above. In this video, we'll be taking a look at the first edition from Baronet from 1978, the limited edition hardcover, the Norton paperback as part of their Will Eisner library from 2006, the Norton hardcover omnibus of the Contract with God trilogy published at the same time as their paperback, and finally the Centennial Edition of A Contract with God published in 2017. So let's take a quick look at 4 different editions of Will Eisner's A Contract with God. A Contract with God was first published by Baronet Publishing Company out of New York, a small publisher that Will Eisner chose instead of comics publishers. This is because he wanted A Contract with God to be sold as a book in bookstores, and the format bears that out. It's a smaller hardcover volume, much closer to a novel, and indeed it was marketed in the paperback version with a graphic novel written on the front cover. As you can see, this means that it is substantially smaller sized pages that this edition contains compared to all of the others that followed. The hardcover and the paperback were the same size. The hardcover was limited to 1,500 copies. It's a plain black cover. You can see that my copy is a little scarred, with A Contract with God and Will Eisner's name embossed in gold. Inside you find brown end papers with printed book plates. These are not pasted on, signed by Will Eisner and numbered out of 1,500. The book itself is printed on sepia-toned paper. It's not just the images but the paper itself that has this brownish tinge, and all of the writing, including the introduction and the preface, are done in this ink on this color paper. This sepia-toned brown printing on beige paper was purposely chosen by Will Eisner out of all the different options he had for his first graphic novel, and he picked this in order to better get across the notions of memory and remembered occurrences and part autobiography, which was so important to the story. This works with the panel-less, borderless art that you have in this book most of the time, which always seems like it's incomplete in the way that it's proceeding beyond what the drawing is showing you. All the filled in with ink panels therefore aren't quite black, they're more brown, making this well suited to the 1930s stories that Will Eisner was telling in 1978. It was meant to be an exercise in nostalgia and memory and history, which is why the brown color scheme of the first edition is so crucial to reading the story a particular way. The 2006 paperback edition from Norton is a broader paperback than the normal comic book format and adds some breadth as well as height to the original page size. The paperback has a list of all the paperbacks and hardcovers Norton have in their Will Eisner library, which is a handy guide. And the full title page is followed by a table of contents that shows you that there are some additions to this edition. And it also features a list of new illustrations. These illustrations were not part of the original edition and were created specifically for this reprinting. Each illustration is one full page panel that illuminates or adds to the story that has just preceded it. Inside the Norton paperback edition, we can see that the colors have been modernized. They've been made black and white, not like the sepia tone of the original edition. The pages are white and the inks are black now. The art obviously is exactly the same, so you still have the same borderlessness, the same continuation as you always did. But the feeling of old memories and an old book that you're reading that was purposeful in the first edition is somewhat diminished in this, I feel. I understand why they did it. This definitely makes it look more like a modern indie comic than the old sepia tone, but there is a purposeful, intentional appearance that has been now changed. When you put them side by side, the difference is quite stark. By doing this, you also note that although the paperback is in a larger format book, the image itself isn't of a different size. It's more the larger spaces as margins on the top and the bottom and to the right side of the page that really affect the size of this new edition. And it's a question of individual preference whether the additional space makes a difference in how you look at these sort of unfinished edges of the panels. The end of the paperback contains an about the author bio, as well as a one-page ad for the other two books in the Contract with God trilogy, also available from the Will Eisner library. Those two books are collected together with A Contract with God in the Norton hardcover omnibus, The Contract with God trilogy, subtitled Life on Dropsy Avenue. The Trilogy hardcover is the same size as the Norton paperbacks, with the binding and dust jacket giving it a slight edge. The dust jacket shows 3 different characters from the 3 books that make up this trilogy, composited together in this image, and the back has the same illustration from the street singer that the first edition did in its end papers. Removing the dust jacket, you see that it's a plain book with no title or author information at all, and a cloth spine, which has bronze embossing showing Eisner and the Contract with God trilogy, Norton. The hardcover is a perfectly manageable size and easy to read in most situations, perhaps not lying flat in bed, for which the paperback would probably be better. Inside, the table of contents shows us that all 3 books are collected in chronological order, as well as their parts are numbered separately. And you can see that the list of new illustrations is part of this as well. We note immediately that the paper is slightly creamier than the paperback edition, and although not completely brown, there is more of a sepia tint in the ink work and in the line work than the paperback. So you can see that the hardcover definitely has more of a yellow sepia tint than the paperback, although it's still nowhere near the original monochromatic scheme. So it's interesting to note that Norton did choose 2 different schemes for their paperback and their hardcover editions coming out at the same time, trying to replicate in the hardcover a little bit of the original's approach. And that brings us to A Contract with God, the Centennial Edition, a hardcover dust-jacketed edition brought out again by Norton to celebrate the 100th birth anniversary of Will Eisner in 2017. The Centennial Edition is exactly the same size as the other Norton paperback and hardcover, again with the binding giving it a little bit more breadth as well as height, and has this wonderful cover which is actually not glossy. It's glossy on the inside, but the outside is this matte parchment-like paper, again with this sepia tone and darker edges and lighter center that gives it an old-timey photograph or illustration feeling. Removing the dust jacket, you find that the book is completely black with no writing on the front or back cover and red embossing on the spine for the author, publisher and title. This edition starts with the same full title plate as the paperback and hardcover editions prior, as well as the same list of books in the Will Eisner library from Norton. You have a new full title page with Will Eisner Centennial Edition, introduction by Scott McCloud, added to what we have seen before. This essay by Scott McCloud is terrific. If you've ever read his writing, you know that it's clear and passionate, and this is no exception. The history of A Contract with God is also a great read to give you context on what was going on at the time and how the reprints occurred and the kind of impact that it had. You get an interesting page here in 4 languages representing the number of translations that this book has seen. The rest of the book is exactly what you have seen in the earlier paperback and hardcover editions. The art in the text has been freshly scanned apparently for this edition, although I couldn't find that much of a difference as far as clarity is concerned. That's not to say this is unclear, it's just that I had a hard time distinguishing if this was really in any way more high resolution than what I've seen before. So this is the Centennial Edition and this is the 2006 paperback. It seems to me that the paper is a little whiter in the Centennial Edition, which may make these blacks appear denser, but at other times it seems that this black is denser. Honestly, I can't tell the difference, but it doesn't matter. This is a handsome volume, it's a hardcover, it's got great paper, it's got very good printing. The only thing that surprises me that it continues to modernize and make more accessible looking a black and white comic out of the sepia and brown tones. I would have thought that for the Centennial Edition, they might go back to the original, but there's no doubt that this does look more like what people reading indie black and white comics. I suppose this would be more familiar and more therefore accessible to new readers. And there is a curator's edition scheduled to come out this year of A Contract with God that will present the original inks and the original pencils in 2 volumes. And I thought that maybe that one would be sepia toned like the original printing, but I don't know if it was part of the inking process or part of the printing process that gave it that color. I do know that it was Eisner's intention and he controlled that. Of course, this level of black and white may be to your preference anyway than that older sepia toned look. The hardcover has solid red end papers, again matching the embossing on its spine, and all in all is a handsome way to have this book if you're only going to have 1 copy. So in conclusion, I'd say that anything outside of the first edition will give you that larger format, although as we saw, that's not necessarily larger pictures but just larger pages. The paperback is the most reasonably priced and easy to get, and the Centennial Edition is a wonderful, handsome collector's item with a couple of great essays that make it worth buying. The Contract with God Trilogy hardcover edition does get closest to the original's browns and sepia, so if that's important to you or if you want to have that as part of the experience, this would definitely be the way to go. But if the black and white doesn't bother you, or if you prefer it, you'd go for one of these 2 depending on what else you want. So there you have it, 4 different editions of A Contract with God by Will Eisner. I hope you enjoyed this video, and please leave comments and questions in the comment section below. And as always, thank you for watching.